Hey everyone, in this video we're going to take a look at part 23 of the Hercules story from Ritchie's Fabulae Faciles. Now this chapter is called The Battle, and you might remember that at this point in the story, we're gearing up for Hercules' ninth labor, where he's trying to get it's sometimes called the girdle. It's really a war belt from the queen of the Amazons, Hippolyta. And we've seen that he went with basically a peace offering saying, please give it to me, which was rejected, right? The other Amazons convinced Hippolyta not to do that. And now they're gearing up for the actual fight. And this is the famous battle between Hercules and his men and the Amazons. So before you dive in, what I always tell you is you want to make sure that you have the vocab under control. So find a commentary. There's a bunch of them out there for Ritchie's Fabulae Faciles where you can find vocab lists. If not, you can always just go through the story and write down the words or look up the words as you go, which is not a bad strategy either. But one way or another, you want to make sure that you feel good about the vocab. Then you want to make sure that the grammar is pretty much under control too, that you're looking up any instances where you're not understanding something. The Hercules story in particular really starts using a lot more subjunctive and different cases, or sorry, uses of the subjunctive. So you want to make sure that you've got that under control too, and you feel comfortable with it. So my suggestion always is to do the read and reread method. So if you can find a partner in class, someone you can read the story to, you want to read it aloud, work on your pronunciation, your speaking skills, right, and then have them read it back to you. That's where you work on your listening skills. And if you can do that, that's a really powerful way to make sure that you're kind of getting a bunch of different uses of your brain to understand this. And once you have that first read through or having someone read it back to you, either way works. You want to write down as you go any gaps where you're not sure about vocab or grammar and you're just kind of stuck. Then you look those up. So let's say you have a word you don't understand, keep looking it up until you feel really good, like, yes, I know what this word means. Then when you read the story a second time or a third time, as many as you need to, it should make a lot more sense. And the goal is always to be able to read this without needing a dictionary for every word or a grammar to kind of look up different grammar structures. If you can read it for what it is, right, and I'm saying read, not necessarily translate, but read it and understand it and feel really good about it, you know you're in a good place. So once you're there, check what you have against what I'm about to do with you now. If your translation is pretty close to mine, again, doesn't have to be perfect, but as long as you're on the right track, you should be pretty good. So let's dive into it right now. So the story starts with this. You have Palus erat non magna inter duos exercitus, nutri tamen initium transeundi facere voleban. So the Palus, right, is a swamp. So it's saying there was erat, a palus, there was a swamp, and it's described as non magna. So you might even say the swamp was not big, or there was a not big swamp. Kind of either way, you're getting at the same thing. But you're saying the swamp, and it's between inter duos exercitus, right? It's between the two armies. Okay, so you're saying the swamp between the two armies wasn't big, but there is sort of a swamp there. Then you have nutri, which means neither, right? Now, this word nutri is neuter, right? And it's the subject of this part of your sentence here. So you're saying, however, neither, meaning neither army. It's really referring to the exercitus, right? The two armies. It's saying neither wanted voleban to facere, to make, in initium, which is a beginning. Now, the word transeundi here is a gerund, right? We've seen these a few of these before. You can tell by the nd ending. And again, oftentimes gerunds, what we've seen so far, a lot of them tend to be genitive. So this is saying a beginning of crossing over. So transeundi is coming from the verb trans, which means across, and eo, meaning to go. So it's literally a going across, if that makes sense. The noun form, you might just translate it as a crossing or a crossing over. So it's saying neither, meaning neither army, wanted to make a beginning, an initium, a beginning of crossing, right? Or of a crossing. What it's getting at is neither one wanted to cross over the swamp, right? They don't want to make the first move. So basically what you have here is two armies staring at each other, right? They're both in good spots. They don't want to cross this swamp between them, okay? Then you have tandem, Hercules signum dadet, et ubi paludem transit proelium commissit. So here you're saying finally you're at last, right? Tandem. Hercules, he dated. It's perfect tense. So he dated signum. He gave the signal, right? And when transit, when he crossed over the paludem, right? That's still the word palus, swamp. So when he crossed the swamp, he commissit proelium. He began or commenced the battle, you could say. Or you could even say the battle commenced. I guess either way it would kind of work. But it's talking about how the first move is really made by Hercules, right? So in other words, the two armies are staring at each other, and finally Hercules is just like, yeah, no, it's time to go, right? I'm gonna start this battle, which again kind of speaks to his character a little bit. Then it continues, and you have Amazones impetum virorum fortissime sustinuerant et contra opinionem omnium tantem virtutem praestiterant ut multos eorum occiderent, multos etiam in fugam conjeceret. So it's saying, again, a long sentence here. The Amazons is your subject, right? The Amazones. So the Amazons, they fortissime, they very bravely, there's your superlative adverb, right? You can tell by, you have the isim, right, ending, which we've seen for superlative adjectives as well. But when you have that long E, that's the distinct adverb ending. So fortissime is describing sustinuerant, right? Which means, it's perfect tense. It means they sustained or endured, you might say. Either one works there. So they bravely endured the impetum, the attack of the men, virorum. And again, the reason you can kind of see Ritchie's using virorum here, men, is because the Amazon are women, right? So every time they mention men in these stories, it's kind of in contradiction, or I guess in opposition to the women who are the Amazons, right? So they brave, and again, the other side note here is it's also trying to play on the idea that Amazons can fight men, right, which we've seen before. So they bravely endured the attack of the men, right? They're excellent fighters. And contra opinionem, so against the, and it's really opinionem omnium. So against, contra, the opinion of all, right, of everyone. And what it means there is sort of like, it's this idea that if you had women fighting men in ancient times, the opinionem omnium, the opinion of everyone, would be that the men would win, right? This is saying contra, so against that opinion, which is kind of the idea that men are sort of braver, I guess, than women, you have tantem virtutem praestiterant. So they showed, or they displayed, praestiterant. It literally means like to stand out. But you could say they displayed such virtue, right? Now here you have the ut clause coming, right? And since you have the tantum, the intensifier, you're looking at a result clause here, which is why you're going to see occiderant. You're saying they displayed such virtue almost with the result that, you might say. Occiderant here is a perfect subjunctive, okay? So with the result that they killed occiderant, right? Multos eorum, many of them, meaning many of the men. So again, the result clause is because they were so brave, right? Tantam virtutem, they had such virtue that they killed a bunch of the men. Okay, and again, this is described as contra opinionem omnium, against the opinion or the thought of everyone, meaning they were able to do this when no one thought they could. Okay, so the Amazons sustain the attack and they start killing the men of Hercules, right? They start basically doing really well, maybe even saying winning the battle. Okay, then you have also, or even, you might say, or and also, they conjeccarent, they threw, and again, that's also continuing the result clause. They threw multos, many, meaning many of the men, in fugam, into flight. So when it says they threw them into flight, it means basically what it sounds like, right? They forced them to run away. Is really what's going on there with that turn of phrase. Okay, so the battle starts. The Amazons withstand the attack of Hercules and his men. They start actually killing a bunch of them, and they cause a bunch of the Greek soldiers, Hercules' men, to run away. Right. Then you continue, you have weary enim novo genere pugnae perturbabantur, nec magnum virtutem praestaban. So you're saying the men, the weary, right? For, I guess, enim means like for, because. So you're saying for the men, perturbabantur. This is imperfect tense, passive voice. You're saying they were disturbed. I guess you could also say like perturbed in English, however you want to do it. It really means they're like thrown off, they're disrupted. It's kind of the idea. The turba in the middle has to do with like jostling things around. Think turbulent. So they were really thrown off by what? Well, you have the ablative here. Again, you have a passive verb, right? Bantor is imperfect passive. So you're looking for an ablative. This is the ablative of means, right? Because you're not referring to a person. It's novo genere. So you're saying they were thrown off by the new kind, pugnae, of fighting, the new style of fighting, you may say, the new kind of fighting. Okay? And it's saying that the men were really caught off guard by the Amazon women and how good they were at fighting, right? They're perturbabanti, right? They're disturbed by this. And so they were thrown off, right? They were perturbed by the new style of fighting. And they did not praestaban, right? So the neck means like and not, right? Praestaban is again that verb. It really means to like stand out, but you can almost translate it as display or show. So they were not showing magnam virtutem, great virtue, right? Great bravery. So it's saying that the men under Hercules' command are basically afraid. They're cowards, right? They run into this new style of fighting. The women are fighting them. They're really thrown off by this. It's something they haven't seen before, and they're not exactly bathing themselves in virtue here, right? They're kind of cowardly. Then it continues. You have Hercules autem cum haec videret, de suis fortunis desperare coipe. So Hercules, however, then you have a cum clause here. When he, and again, the cum is going with subjunctive. Videret is imperfect subjunctive. So it's saying when he saw, or was seeing, you might say, when he saw hike is these things. It's neuter substantive. So it's saying when he saw these things, he began, coipit, perfect tense, he began to desperare, to despair. So he starts to be really like upset by this, right? It's a complementary infinitive. He began to despair concerning day, right? Concerning suis fortunis, concerning his own fortunes. Suis there is reflexive. So it's talking about himself, his own fortunes. What it means by this is he's starting to think the battle is not going to go very well, and he's starting to really doubt his own situation, right? So doubt is starting to creep into Hercules' mind, which is something we actually haven't seen before, right? He's never really doubted himself until this point. Then you continue of milites igitur vehementer cohortatus est ut pristinae virtutis memoriam retinerent neu tantem dedicus admitterent hostiumque impetum fortitus sustinerent. And then it actually continues. This is a very long sort of ending here. But it's saying, therefore, he cohortatus est. It's a deponent verb, means he encouraged, right? So excuse me, this is coming from the verb, it's a deponent verb, cohortor, which means to like encourage. This is just perfect tense. So he encouraged the milites, the soldiers, vehementer, kind of fiercely, right? Strongly, not really violently, maybe strongly is a good way to do it. And he does this ut, right? So that you might even say they might retain, right? Retinerent. They might retain the memory, or retinerent memoriam here really means like remember. Literally, it's retain the memory, but he's trying to say that they might remember or retain the memory of pristinae virtutis, of former virtue, right? Former bravery. So the idea is he goes around encouraging, saying, "Hey, remember, right? You guys are actually really good soldiers. You're very you're very tough. Don't be afraid. Remember all the good times in the past, right? That's what he's trying to remind them of. So it says he tries to remember, or sorry, to encourage them so that they remember their former virtue, right? Their former glory, and not neu, right? And not allow admitterent, right, and not allow such dedekos, right, such disgrace. Okay, so there's interesting terminology here, right? Dedekos, this disgrace, because they would be losing to women, right? So it's hard to ignore the fact that you have Greek men versus Amazon women, right? And Ritchie does a good job of kind of bringing that through in the story here. And right, you have hostiumque, so it's saying and that they might fortiter, bravely sustinerant, they might bravely sustain, right? It's sort of an indirect command here. Bravely endure the impetum hostium, the attack of the enemy. Okay, so that ending part is really the command he's giving them. He's saying, hey, he's encouraging them with this sort of commanding, like, hey, remember what you're doing and don't allow this disgrace. And make sure that you endure the attack, right? That's why you have all these subjunctives kind of going in a row here. But at the end of the day, he's trying to tell his men to kind of buck up and fight, right? That's really the message he's bringing across here, right? Then you end with this second half of this bigger paragraph, right? So you have quibus verbis, animos omnium ita erexit, ut multi etiam qui vulneribus confecti essent proelium sine mora redinte grarent. There we go. So you're saying quibus verbis, so with these words, right, is really kind of how you can translate that, right? So with these words, he lifted, erexit, it means he kind of like lifted up. He so lifted up the animos omnium, the spirits of all, right? The spirit of everyone, the mind, or I guess spirit probably works best, of all his soldiers is really what it means. So that you have another ut clause, so that many also, right? So that also many who, you have this relative clause here happening. So you have many who confecti essent. Here, the confecti essent part is pluperfect passive subjunctive. And it's because that qui, right, the who, is setting up what we call a relative clause of characteristic, right? So it's describing the multi is kind of one way to think about it. And it takes a subjunctive. So it's saying he lifted up their minds, right, their spirits. He raised their spirits so that many who had been kind of felled is kind of way we do it. Confected, confecti, kind of afflicted, maybe. Vulneribus, by wounds or with wounds. It doesn't mean they're dead. It means that they're wounded, right? Is really what he's getting at. So you could almost say many who had been kind of affected by wounds, redintegrarent, they might renew. Is really what that means. To reintegrate is kind of what you'd say in English. But it's a result clause here, so that they might go back or renew. Maybe renew is the better way to do it. Renew without delay, sine mora, the proilium, the battle. Right. So it's saying that he goes around, he raises their spirits, and it's so that many who had been right affected by these wounds, they might renew the battle, right? Red integral and go back into the fight without delay, right? That's the result of his lifting of their spirits. Is kind of one way to think about it. So hopefully that made some sense. This is a little trickier one. It's a lot of subjunctive happening here, a lot of result clauses, things mixing. Like I said, you had that relative clause of characteristic in the middle of this last part. So it's definitely getting a little trickier in terms of uses of the subjunctive, but it's also really good practice. Right, so it's a good chance to kind of work your way through and see a lot of these uses of the subjunctive in context, and hopefully they're making some sense to you. But like I said, if you get stuck on any of this, if you're like, Mr. C, what do you mean by result clause? You want to look them up, right? There's a bunch of resources you can find, whether it's a textbook or YouTube, where you can see explanations of these. This is what I always tell you what I mean by that read and reread method. Maybe the first time you read through this, you don't know what's going on. Look it up, and then the second and third time, you should feel a lot more comfortable with what's going on. If you have any questions at all, put them in the comments below. I'm happy to help. But otherwise, keep reading it, keep practicing it, and hopefully you're feeling pretty good about this story and you're getting better at it as you go. Good luck.